Hello and welcome everyone to my second beginner's guide tutorial. Today we'll be talking about the menu, all the options you have available in the menu, both on the desktop version and the phone version. So if you're playing on mobile only, keep watching, and in the end I always explain the contrasts. Enjoy! So, the newspaper is the first option available. For mobile version, you have to go to drop down menu here and then go to the newspaper. The first thing you see in both menus is the ranking with the amount of points each player has, and also who has the high command, which gives you certain advantage. On mobile version you get more detail on how many points that player needs to win the game. The coalitions tab does exactly similar thing. When you press on it, it shows you the description of that coalition and the members it has. On the mobile version you can't select that here, you can go to the diplomacy menu and look at coalitions from there. So let's move on to the most important part, the statistics. So at the start of each day you'll get a different statistic comparing all the players against each other. There are 4 statistics that get repeated, and the order is always the same. The first one you always get is the wealthiest nations. This basically tells you how much money in stock a nation has, and instead of nations it just gives you the names of the players. The next statistic is the largest economies, and this basically tells you how much that nation produces each day in tons. For example, I know I produce 8,000 tons in total for food and so on and so on, and then the total will be later on shown in the newspaper for everyone to see. This kind of gives you an understanding of economy of an enemy player, whether they are dependent on buying things from stock market or not. The next one is the most efficient economies, and this one tells you how efficiently your provinces gather resources. This depends on the buildings you have in your provinces and the morale of those provinces. So technically speaking, smaller nations always have more efficient economies since they haven't expanded or captured new provinces that harm their overall income because of the upkeep. The final one, and the most important one in my opinion, is the world's mightiest armies. It takes armies of all nations and divides them according to percentages. So it lets you know how strong your army is compared to others, if you're on top list or not. Here you can see who's stronger or weaker than you. So for example, if my neighbor here is weaker than me, I know I can be more reckless and expand elsewhere or even plan on attacking him. But if he is stronger than me, then I need to improve my forts next to him, because if I attack somewhere else I will expose myself. So it's important to pay attention to this, to be aware of what's going on. But most important thing is that they always get repeated, and the mobile version, when you go to articles, you can't filter according to statistics. So you can use the trick I use, which is think of the country that will most definitely be on that top list and then just search for their name, and it should pop up right in the search. Another option is to just scroll down and then look for it that way, but as you can see you can't always scroll down in the mobile version, and especially at the end of the day it's a bit hard to find because so many things have happened, and on bigger maps it's even more impossible. As for game info and rules, these are the basic things that you can also see before joining the game by pressing the info button in the menu. So, what does the newspaper reveal? Well, first of all, it reveals the losses of enemies. So for example, if I look up here Arabia, I want to know how strong their army is. So what I can do is go to the newspaper, look for Arabia, and then I'll get his wars and his losses against his enemy losses. You can also filter this according to yourself, so any wars you've been fighting or anything that happened to you. For example, I can see here that there was an explosion in my capital, which means that there's a spy in my capital. You can see your allies' actions, and your allies is not just your coalition members, but whoever you have shared map with or right of way with. In terms of other reports, this tells you what buildings the enemy is building. As you can see here, Boston has a new fortress. It can also tell you what buildings are damaged, and most importantly, what the enemy is producing. So if an enemy has produced a battleship, it will reveal in here that X country has built a battleship within X city. And same goes for another technology. So if you pay attention to the newspaper, you basically know what buildings the enemy has, what they've been struggling with, and what they've been producing. So this gives you a good understanding of the whole situation on the map and can actually give you an intel about your enemy that will help you win. For the mobile version, you can also filter this, but only under here. So that concludes newspaper, and let's move on to the second most important part of this game, the diplomacy. You can access it here on the desktop version, and for the mobile version it's the first option down below. So you have few self-explanatory sorting options. You can adjust to and see how many provinces or who has the most provinces, relation that other players have set against you or you have set against them. The score, which depends not only on the amount of provinces you have, but how well your provinces are maintained and buildings you have and so on. Whether players in AI or not, but this doesn't tell you if the player went inactive or not, so this is not really accurate. You can send messages directly from here, or you can press the eye icon, which tells you about the player. So what to focus on in the nation profile is the countries that the player is at war with. You can see it by pressing this, for example, and you see the drop down menu with countries they are at war with, the amount of units they have, and this number only indicates the number of units you can see. So for example, for myself, I can see that I have 86 units because I can see myself. But for Arabia, I can only see 69. I can't see how many units he has here, so the statistics doesn't count that. Another important aspect is the average morale. The lower your average morale, the worse your country is off in terms of production and morale of your units. So if a country has a low average morale, then you know that they won't be putting up as much of a fight against you. Another important thing is service record by pressing this button here, and I always focus on two things. One is when was the account created, which basically tells me how new the player is and whether they are experienced or not. Most important thing though is the total amount of games they have joined and how many times they have won. On mobile version, things are a bit different, but they reveal the same information. When you press the country, you get information right here. And if you want to gain more information about the player, you just press this button, which brings you to profile as well. And you can see how many games they have joined here and which maps as well. So going back to diplomacy menu, you can change the relationship you have with another country at any time. The only time you can't do this is when you're with a coalition with the player. So once you're in a coalition with others, you're locked into shared map, but you can switch to shared intelligence, which is only available for high command users. On the mobile version, you can do the same by pressing the country, and then from the drop down menu, you select which one you want and then you select to confirm. So, what does each relationship mean? The right of way is self-explanatory and just lets the other player pass through your lands, but you will be set as their ally, so they will have 70% movement speed within your provinces instead of 35%. Shared map is exactly the same, but with the addition of sharing your map with the player, and shared intelligence is exactly the same with the addition of sharing espionage intelligence. Trade embargo is the same as ceasefire. It prohibits the other player from buying your trades from the stock market, or if enemy has set it towards you, you can't buy their trades on the stock market. In addition to that, your units will be set to attack if that player enters your provinces, or to automatically engage at sea. So be careful with this to not accidentally start a war or use this if you don't trust somebody and you just had a ceasefire with somebody. War is self-explanatory. You get the same disadvantages as with trade embargo. Usually you don't have to change the relationship with players, but I will give you a tip right now. Go to the small nations that are always AI and set your relationship with them to right of way. If after a few days your popularity is quite high, they will most likely give you back. I don't know how this works completely, but sometimes it's random, sometimes it depends if they are fighting the same nation as you are, and gaining this right of way can be really advantageous since you can surprise players from behind, for example, not expecting any attacks from the AI provinces. And from here on, let's move to trade. In trade, you have three options. Important thing to note here is provinces. If you plan to trade any of your provinces, you need to remember that you can only trade them from day 3. You can only trade 1 province a day, and you can trade maximum of 7 provinces. Under the chat, the only thing to remember is whatever you send can be revealed by spies if somebody has spies within your nation. Think about how many messages you send and how they can be taken out of context if somebody you're allied with finds it out, or if your enemy can find it out. For the mobile version, it's quite similar. When going here, you get the same chat where you can just go and select the trade option with the same things. That brings us to coalitions. Coalitions are self-explanatory. You just get the list. When you have your own coalition, you can either accept or kick another players. Important thing to know though is when you're leaving a coalition, you will have 3-day cooldown before you can join another coalition. Or if you're kicked by a coalition leader, that cooldown will be a day instead of 3 days. When you create a coalition, you can change these later on, so don't worry. For mobile, you can find this information under diplomacy and coalitions. It tells you the same information. You can add and kick players the same way. You can change anything the same way. It's just that it's a little bit less comfortable. So that concludes coalition, and let's move on to resources. I explained this menu previously, and the only recommendation I would give here is make sure that under no circumstances your stock falls below 0. On the mobile version, you can do the same thing by pressing resources here. The only other thing I would note here is when you're adjusting the sliders, be careful that you don't press this button right here. You don't get any confirmation message, so be careful with your fat fingers. And that brings us to the stock market. Top offers are best best prices, and under all you can see all the offers that are currently on the market. If there's a nation that you're at war with or has a trade embargo set on you, you'll notice it here as well when one of the options is grayed out. When it comes to buying, for example, right now I need fish because I have bad income, so I'm gonna buy fish as much as possible, especially at this low price because this is dirty cheap. I could buy all 5,000 of this, but I'm not going to because I want to leave a low price in the stock market. Pay attention to this and you can potentially manipulate the market this way. Important thing to remember though is that the AI uses the stock market as well. You can also see your trade history or your current trades, and this is basically your whole history. For the mobile version you can access the stock market right here, and under the order book you have current orders and the history as well. But everything else is the same. And that brings us to Espionage. First thing I want to note is that desktop version is absolutely better. If you ever have to do Espionage, go to the desktop version because it gives you this overview of where your spies are. When accessing Espionage on the mobile version, it only gives you a list like this. You have 4 types of spies. You have counter espionage, which you can only put in your own provinces. They detect enemy spies within that single province. They either stop them and catch them, or they can't stop them and they just reveal which country put spies in that province. The next one is intelligence spy that I use mostly. It gives you basic information about the country and it also intercepts ingoing and outgoing messages. Economic sabotage spies steal enemy resources or destroy them. So in this case I know that the enemy has economic sabotage spy within my capital because once I go to the newspaper, filter to myself, I get a news article. A mysterious explosion destroyed vast amounts of lumber in my capital. I won't try to spell that, which means that in my capital enemy has economic sabotage spy. As for the military sabotage spies, they reveal armies around the province they are stationed in, or if you're lucky, they reveal the entire army of the nation. This is only for a day though, so whenever you get it, make sure to take screenshots. So under the report, you get coalition or private messages, all the resources the enemy has in stock, all the trade offers they have active within the stock market at the moment, their trade history, relationships or trades they have with another country, which technology and which buildings they are building and where. Your spies can also damage these buildings, delay their construction, or simply deactivate them. As for the mobile version, you can add or dismiss spies within a specific province you have selected. You need to select and press on their name, and then from there on go to the espionage options. And that brings us to final and the most important menu in my opinion within this game, which is province administration. The resource tab just stacks up similar resources on top of each other, from the province that produced the most of that resource to the province that produces least of that resource. The building tab gives you complete overview of all of your buildings throughout all your provinces, and you can filter them easily by pressing down on the ones you want to see. The order of the filters are always the same. First you get the highest level of that building. For factories level 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. Then you get the damaged ones for each level. And finally in the end I will get the provinces that don't have that building. You can also order according to things you're producing, which I'm not in this case, or your constructions. For the mobile version you get the same functionalities on the provinces menu here, but as you can see it's far less user-friendly in my opinion. You can still filter the same way you can filter on the desktop version, but you have to single-handedly select them one by one. Or what you could do is hold your finger down, select, hold your finger down, select, and then go to construction or production and do whatever you want with it. One advantage to note here though for the mobile version is the amount of information it provides, especially for the new player. When you press on the name, it basically gives you all the information you need to know and other basic information that you don't directly get from the desktop version, but you get some of it when you select a province and hover over this icon here. So that concludes province administration. I would recommend to check this at least once a day, but if you have more provinces and you're in the middle of the war, I suggest checking it a few times a day and making sure everything is okay. So that's all you need to know, but I'll mention the reports page. It gives you notifications. It's the same on phone, which you get right here under this bell. Make sure to check in regularly. It just keeps piling up and you'll miss it. And that's also why you need to check newspaper. The map controls are self-explanatory in my opinion. I always prefer the nation colors because, as I mentioned a few times, none of these relationships are binding, so I always look at the game from the perspective of the nation colors and not the relations. For the mobile version, map controls can be accessed under this section. Final thing to note is the chat. I would recommend using this whenever possible, especially if you're a new player. You can ask anything. There are people from the community that will most likely answer. For the mobile version, you go to chat here and it's the same overview. And that sums up the tutorial on the menu. I hope everything was explained well here. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment. The next topics I'm planning on making are the buildings, explain each building type, as well as the units, explaining what each unit does, when to produce them, and finally how battles work, naval battles, or how to do air battles. If you're interested, make sure to subscribe, I guess. I can't believe I'm saying that. I hope this helps, and don't forget to enjoy the game.